So today, the international community is celebrating International Literacy Day as designated by the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. That's UNESCO in 1967. Now, UNESCO advocates that literacy is a human right and the foundation of all learning. Though UNESCO will host this year's International Literacy Day conference virtually, many well-known writers will still take part in celebrating the event and, of course, highlight the importance of learning about literature and language. In 2017, Stats SA's General Household Survey results showed that about 47% of South African children never read a book or drew with a parent or guardian. Just shocking statistics, it really is, and I'm not sure it's gotten any better. But let's talk about this. We're joined by Godwin Khosa. He's the CEO of the National Education Collaboration Trust, and Billy Guy Bembe. He's the CEO of Black Child, It's Possible. So nice to have you guys with us. Welcome.
Thank you, Leanne.
Good morning, Leanne, and good morning, listeners.
Yeah,
good morning to the viewers.
Thank you. So, I mean, when you read some of these statistics, and they've always shocked us, they always have, because we do have a very, unfortunately, low literacy rate in South Africa. But perhaps maybe I can start with you, Godwin. How are we looking? I mean, since 2017, has anything improved with the state of literacy in the country?
So we've been improving. Over the years, notwithstanding that we're not at the best of ranks that we should be compared to other countries. And unfortunately, I mean, you know, the COVID-19 disruptions and the time that the kids have spent at home have drawn us back and slowed that process of improving, literacy levels in the country.
And that worries, it is worrying because, you know, a lot of the times that the only access to a lot of our learners have to books is at school. Anything out of school, they don't have. So, you know, being in such a strict and tight lockdown has no doubt, Billy Guy, seen a great decline in the state of reading in South Africa.
It certainly has, Leanne, and thanks for this opportunity to speak to your viewers this morning. What I've observed from my end, from Black Child It's Possible, particularly during this lockdown period, is I give talks particularly to school-going learners as well as those who are in universities and those entering the workspace. And one of the things that was fundamental to bring across to them is that reading and writing doesn't necessarily have to always happen in a formal space. So a lot of our learners were not taught the self-independence of teaching myself. Now, if there's no teacher in front of me, it does not also mean I cannot take a book, and not necessarily a book. A lot of learners have their phones. It's also the choice of material that learners will read on those phones. I often say that the most important thing is just the ability to read, and following that, it's then reading to understand. So during lockdown, what was the drawback was a lot of young people taking the initiative of wanting to teach themselves, and reading is across. There's billboards, there's magazines from neighbors. You don't have to read the most latest of information. Anything that is worth of literature for you to scroll your eyes across, have that ability to be fluent in reading and writing, that is what needed to happen. So there are those who took initiative, but what I picked up was a lot of learners were not taking the task of actually teaching themselves in a time when there isn't a teacher or a lecturer in front of them.
Yeah. You know, it's quite amazing when you look back at the history of a day like this. I mean, I mentioned it in the introduction all the way back in 1965. So it was a World Conference of Ministers of Education in Tehran in 1965, where they basically initiated this so that we could grasp the concept of reading, writing, arithmetic, and abilities basically in the foundation phases that can last you through your lifetime. You know, these are such basics that we that do it and participate in this perhaps take it for granted, but there are so many around the world, and even here we don't have to look further than our own borders in South Africa, where children unfortunately are illiterate. And you know, this is where do we look for blame? Is it something where our education department is missing something? Is it a state of not access? Where do you think we are going wrong? Again, if I can bring you in, Godwin, where do you think we are going wrong as South Africa?
So, Leanne, I think the first thing is to join the world and celebrate the good initiative, which started in 1965. I think it's important even today to emphasize that literacy and reading actually is the bedrock for development. Even in the 4IR, programming will start with being able to read and that sort of thing. So we should not take our eye off, literacy and reading. It's important. It's going to catapult, our development, forward. Blame? I don't think so. But thinking ahead, yes, and understanding, where we come from and what could be the causes of the not so good reading levels at the moment. I think there are fundamentally three, variables at play. One is culture, the culture around reading. Two, it's obviously behaviors which fuel culture. Three, it's the technical, abilities to break into the code of reading. So the breaking into the code of reading, when you see a number of letters put together and you're able to sound them out, it's something that gets taught in the classroom. And there are well-developed methodologies to teach learners on how to break into that code. It doesn't happen optimally, and more so that many of our teachers would not have been taught on how to teach reading. That bit is being addressed through universities, and I think we need to push more to prepare more of the teachers who can teach reading. The second bit is the behavior, so which leads into culture. So the behavior around reading, actually, it's a challenge that has to be taken up by, between the classroom and the household. Teachers must, help, learners to build that behavior, cultivate the behavior to read, which would ultimately become a culture. If we did that, and we did it well between the home and the school, would have a bigger proportion of South Africans who aren't only able to read, but they enjoy reading, and they read in order to contribute to their economic livelihoods, as well as enjoyment and self-fulfillment.
Yeah, I love that, because that's so important, and that's an aspect we need to speak about, because, and Billy, this is where I know you do, and you're very passionate about this. You run reading and writing matters, and matters basically where you go into households and we talk about early childhood development. So does the love for reading and books, does it come naturally, or is it something that you actually need to instill in a child, that as us as parents, we read to our children, obviously, which is something that is also another topic of discussion, but does it come naturally, or is it a love that's developed?
Leanne, great question. Just yesterday, I put up a Facebook post with a father and 4 of his kids sitting with him, and all 5 of them basically have a book in their hand. And the post just basically read, children do not look at what you say, they look at what you do. And, that for me just stood out as to, to your question, do children just naturally enjoy reading? There are those odd few, the outliers, but the majority will actually learn or pick up the skill when they see it by those that they look up to. So if you see a mother or a father, taking importance in reading or having reading material inside the home, that, automatically, says to a child, this is something that is important. But a second thing also, Leanne, which Godwin spoke to, is something that I'd like to pick up is attitude. When I was in grade 8, just finishing primary, going to high school, accounting was just showing me flames, Leanne, and this may not necessarily relate, but here's the part I want to show about attitude. First term, I got 33% for accountancy. Second term, I got 30%. Third term and fourth term, it's too embarrassing to say, so I left accounting. But because I went into business later on, I realized the importance of knowing accountancy. So Rao University, which is now UJ at the time, had these CDs that I went and took myself and self-taught accountancy. Now, this was an attitude. I realized the importance of accountancy then because I now run a business. It's that which I speak to when I speak to a lot of young people, that what is our attitude towards reading, towards writing? And that in itself, as a nation, you know, you spoke about who is to blame for the lack of interest in reading. I don't think it's anybody to blame. What Godwin has spoken to, some of those points are very valid. But here's another one, the lowering of standards as a nation. One of the chapters in my latest book I spoke to is that, you know, there's a quote I just opened with saying that destroying a nation does not require the use of atomic bombs or the use of long-range missiles. It only requires lowering of the quality of education and allowing cheating in examination by the students. Yeah. Patients die at the hands of such doctors. Buildings collapse at the hands of such engineers. Money is lost at the hands of such economists and accountants. Humanity dies at the hands of such religious scholars. Justice is lost at the hands of such judges. The collapse of education is the collapse of a nation. So the lowering of standards, Leanne, is also what we need to blame holistically as a nation.
Yeah, it is. It really is. It's something that, you know, there's no excuse for it. You know, the standards should be higher, not lowered all the time to just push, you know, learners through the system, and you just don't know what you're pushing out, and this is a very big problem. Godwin, how does your organisation support your Read to Lead campaign, basically promoting activities such as reading aloud? And I know that that's normally held during national events like the Mother Tongue Day or Read Aloud Day.
So the Read to Lead campaign is a campaign of the Department of Basic Education, which obviously whose aim is to push the business of improving reading from outside the classroom into the community and connecting the communities and the classrooms. So we support that in various ways. And also, I mean, our support ranges from the classroom into the communities. In the classrooms, we focus on helping teachers to understand how to teach reading. So before COVID hit, we had actually trained about 100,000 teachers on how to teach reading. So that's the first part. But secondly, there are all sorts of campaigns and movements that we drive together with the Department of Basic Education that seeks to improve the culture of reading. One of those is the Read Aloud, campaigns. Others are reading competitions. A new one that we established during the lockdown is the Virtual Reading Club, which actually took the challenge from the president to get more people reading, get people reading at least 12 books a year. So we've launched this Virtual Reading Club, and every month we select a book, we get people to read that book, and we have 2 hours of discussing the book as a way of contributing to building the culture of reading. A very successful initiative on its own right. And I know that there are other reading clubs that have emerged or continue to do so. And our hope is that if we connect these reading clubs across the country, we would have more adult people who would support a reading, get into this culture of reading, and therefore allow more kids to exposure to others that they can emulate. The basic thing that any parent should do actually, have a couple of books on your bedside, let your kids see that you read, then you can ask them to read. And then what completes reading actually, it's engagement. So when your kids have read, sit with them, ask them questions, read with them, allow them to read to you, read to them. That's how we'll build, the culture of reading in the country. And that will self-sustain. And one day we'll find ourselves, alongside the ranks of the developed countries where almost everybody enjoys reading.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful sight when you actually do see people reading, sitting in parks, on public transport or wherever. But the thing is that I think we've all just become so consumed with our devices and phones. Everybody's heads are stuck in social media and worrying about all these kind of things, as opposed to perhaps just taking a book and reading. And that's where I find it quite interesting, because I'm reading that the theme here for International Literacy Day is literacy for a human-centered recovery, narrowing the digital divide. That's the global theme for this year. That digital divide, you know, that's another issue that we haven't really touched on too much when it comes to the continent, Africa, as opposed to, as you say, the developing world. And again, it worries me that we are falling behind, is that, you know, this digital divide is leaving Africa and South Africa, again, with this gap just getting bigger and bigger when it comes to literacy. What do you think? What are your views on this? Billy, do you agree or do you disagree? Do you think we keeping up?
We certainly aren't, Leanne. I think last year I had an interview there with Sakina, and it was around a study that we were conducting as Black Child as Possible in the Free State, to over 300 schools, and this was in the ICT environment, and it was basically trying to check the readiness of schools within both rural and township schools. And, you know, one of the observations I did share with your viewers last year was that you have companies that basically dump, you know, so you find 800 iPads sitting, and some of them, you know, the setback is that licensing fees have not been paid, so software can't be updated. So answering your question, Leanne, we are trying our best as corporates, as government, as civil society to actually make this fourth industrial revolution happen. But we do not have a system where we are all working, you know, in one unison, if I may put it that way. So we launched, I think, 3 years ago. You spoke to myself about libraries that we're launching. This was with another corporate partner. One of your producers, I shared with them that it's all good and well would go into a community, launch an entire library. You know, a good example is a library in Ekurhuleni where, you know, over 2 months later, when we went to go and check and do our monitoring evaluation, we realized that these facilities get locked up. And we, you know, it's not now just providing the library and just the books and even the computers with internet. It's then having someone who is passionate, number one, as an educator or within the community, who will continue that process of either teaching young people about, you know, technology, about reading. So those institutions get closed up because if there's no interest or someone who drives that in communities, they become white elephants. Yeah. So to answer your question in shortly, and we're still a little bit far away, and I'm a staunch advocate that every home should have free internet for one simple reason: the ability to build, to create new things. During lockdown, an author like myself wrote this book, you know, using the internet for a number of things: to design, to communicate with other authors, to set up a book launch, to network. So we really need to catch up as South Africa and Africa as a whole.
Yeah, we do. I mean, I'm just reading some of the facts and figures with South African adult illiteracy is at 12%. That's the latest figures that I'm reading coming out of 2019. It's on the DHET Gov website, and it's just, you know, a breakdown of the illiteracy rate and where we're at globally. But the global average is 12%, so, you know, it is a little bit of a... Sorry, the global average is 14%, and we are sitting at 12% when it comes to illiteracy. So we really do need to work harder on this. And, I mean, Billy, I can't agree with you more when it comes to getting free access to internet, you know, around the country, because that, you know, this is the key. This is where people are now able to access anything at any given time. But there are restraints, and this is a very, very big problem. So let me have a look and see, Godwin, in your opinion, of some of the programs that you engage in to create awareness other than these annual events. I mean, how do you go out and be a part of the community on a daily basis?
So we work largely through schools. So we use teachers and schools and school staff as the agency base to get into communities and to reach you know, learners. But you see, the improvement of literacy has many levels. As I said, there's the community level, there's the classroom, there's the teachers, and then the systems. We also get involved at policy level and research, finding out what the reading levels are. I mean, we've just carried out a big study involving about 15,000, learners last year to find out how well they can read and to establish the impact of COVID. And indeed, there's been regress in the number of learners that can read and their competency levels. But we also look at policy elements that would create enabling environments for literacy to improve. For instance, we are now undertaking a study that looks at translanguaging, and it's a complex, exercise that looks at how learners acquire language and how learners actually move from their mother tongue to a second language and a third language, and how best policy could actually support such a structured and orderly movement of kids from their own mother tongues to other languages.
Godwin, I have to leave it there. But guys, keep up the great work. Keep the passion, because that's what we need, are passionate individuals like you trying to instill this literacy and reading and just let it become a natural thing. Do yourself a favor. Just grab a book today and read it to yourself. Read it out loud. Let it happen. That's the only way we're going to instill that love. Godwin Khosa, CEO of the National Education Collaboration, and Billy Guy Bembe, CEO of Black Child. It's possible.
Indeed.
Yeah?
We'll end it as we should have started it. That was the useless fact for the day.
There we go.